Ventures and Visionaries, Episode 4, The Future of Technology and Business. I'm your host, Mordy Hackel. I'm an entrepreneur, business founder, strategic consultant. I love people and I love technology, and I am a problem solver. So because of my love of people, business, and technology, I'm super excited to have Dr. Maria Blekher, who is a early stage investor in mental and neuroscience technology. She is a strategy growth advisor. She's a speaker and a mentor. Her background is as a consumer behavior scientist who then turned into a growth strategist and an investor. Maria, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, because I'd love to learn more.
Sure thing. So, Morty, first of all, it's great being here. I love the intro. Just like you said, Dr. Maria Blekher trained as a behavioral scientist, aka spent several times trying to understand how we as humans are making decisions in this space that is called behavioral economics. You can tell by the accent I'm an Israeli, so I've done that in Ben Gurion University in Beersheba. And about 11 years ago now, I came to New York to join NYU Stern School of Business for a research project as part of my postdoc. Very quickly, I realized that we have these great tools in which we can help people. We can understand how people are making decisions, and we can impact them. And we'd rather use them for good than selling, another product or Coca-Cola or another iPhone. And that was kind of a segue to what I'm doing now, which is, being a growth strategist and advisor and investor to early stage startups in the mental and neurotech spaces.
So, Maria, firstly, I want to say it's very, very cool, because understanding people and being able to understand the irrational behavior that we have when we believe that we're rational is, I think, at the core fundamental of the economic research that you did or are doing. Is that correct?
Well, it is. I'm not, as a disclosure, I'm not an active scholar. I've done that part previously, but definitely, there are so many books and a lot of research, and you have Kahneman and Tversky with their research and the Nobel Prizes, demonstrating that while people thought that they are making rational decisions, they're not. We're not. And so, the first step of a solution for every problem is just acknowledging the problem. And so I think we're at this stage where most of the people realize that they're not rational decision makers. And that's definitely fundamental for everything and anything, because we speak about startups and segments and go to market and many other things. But when you look at it from a closer kind of perspective, segments are not making decisions. Companies are not making decisions. The ones who are making decisions are people. So the better we understand people, humans, our motivations, what makes eventually everybody tick, the better we can cater to their needs, the better we can steer decisions in the right directions. And it's just that's what we all have in common. We're humans. So the better the faster we realize that, I think it can be, bring a lot of good on multiple levels, from startups, companies, but looking to kind of
So
global impact.
it sounds like what you're saying is we should acknowledge our own humanity while at the same time be aware of the pros and the cons.
Well, yes, we better acknowledge our own humanity, because denying it kind of, we can, but why would we? And everything comes with a price tag. So the pros and the cons are part of our human experience. If you try to create ideal formula and you remove the cons, you end up with sort of an algorithm. We're going to probably talk later about AI, but if you take away the human parts, which sometimes are the more messy, emotional, unclear, and irrational and illogical, but also part of this kind of magic that makes us human. That's honestly.
So, so how did your journey go from, you know, a more academic background into venture startups and the messy world of humans in business, as opposed to the much more Well, probably more of a fundamental understanding of people in a rational lab.
Yeah, I love this distinction. So, as a disclosure, I've never been a full-time academic. So even during my, undergrad and MBA and PhD, I always had a job in the real world, what I call. I was always fascinated by this intersection between the theoretical research and, the great models and the studies we usually run in the lab, and then, how it plays out in the real world. And interestingly enough, and surprisingly or not, real life sometimes, or most of the times, are very, very, very different than what we find in the lab. And so that was always kind of the thing that I was interested in, probably the real life more than the research, but the research as a tool or as a segue to understanding real life. So that's really the blend. And life happens the way they happen. I came to New York. I spent a year and a half probably at NYU, and I realized that I don't want to be a full-time researcher. And full full-time professor doing research in the lab, teaching, and I love teaching. I'm an educator, and I've been teaching for many years. But at the same time, we're in New York, and that's the epicenter of business, and everything is happening here. And so it was kind of a natural transition for me. And we're looking at 2014, 15. Back in the days, you could notice this migration of Israeli startups into the city. And I happened to be in this right place where people and former colleagues and former students started to reach out to me asking for advice. And being coming from my background of consumer behavior and marketing strategy, and then being in New York and kind of starting to embed myself into the ecosystem, like very often happens, one thing led to another, and I joined Yeshiva University, and it's been a great kind of a journey because I was the founding director and I ran the Masters in Digital Marketing and Media program for a while. So uh, as a founder who built that from kind of from the ground up, it was a great experience that also was kind of gave me the entrepreneurial hands-on within the academic environment, and then the YU Innovation Lab, which is, was the hub, the launching page, hold on, which was the was the hub that YU created for early stage Israeli startups in Manhattan, and so building that also from ground up, developing the ecosystems, um, mentoring the startups, connecting them with the students, guiding the students, and really creating a lot of value to all parties involved. It was just, again, a very natural development of things. And then, yeah.
So, as somebody who worked with young people a lot, a lot of the complaints that we hear today about young people is that they're not as motivated, they're not as interested, they don't think about it in the same classical way. What are your observations?
So I would argue that claim, and I would definitely not put all
Good.
young people into a single bucket. I can speak about my students, and I've been teaching at YU for 9 years. Uh, I had the most amazing students every single year. They were inspiring, they were entrepreneurial, they were hands-on, they were motivated, and it was a pleasure, going into the classroom, and I was teaching either marketing or innovation, very hands-on. So like not the kind of classes where you could pass just by reading a textbook. And they worked hard. And so I'm sure that there are groups of students and young people who would be a fit for your kind of description. I'm happy to say that there are definitely young people out there who we can count on for the future because they are the next,
Well, yeah, I'm
generation of leaders.
super excited about that because I have to say that if that pessimism becomes more pervasive, it may even become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing.
Oh, I think we both. No, that's not a good thing. So in this case, I think we do have a next generation of leaders to count on, and yeah, so I'm optimistic about the next generation. I know they've been kind of labeled and but uh, yeah.
Oh, and I appreciate that. I think that is absolutely a wonderful perspective to have, both from the optimistic perspective in general, and in particular about people, because after all, we are messy, but we are the people that we are because who we are. So maybe that brings us into the next area of tension in today's day and age that people speak a lot about, and that is, and you mentioned this yourself earlier, that we're going to talk a little bit about AI. So, AI, before we get into the mental health area, what are your observations, both in terms of innovation and startups and things like that, that involve both people and thinking? And we can get into that in a minute because I think there's some interesting insights that you probably have as well.
Yeah, so that's a big question. We speak about AI today, kind of forgetting or sometimes forgetting that AI is a technology, it's a tool, it's enabler. It's not the first one that came around. It's the most recent and probably one of the most powerful ones. And I think that's the way we should look at it. You look at startups 2 or 3 or 5 years ago, mentioning that you're using AI or that you have an AI driven platform would sound super innovative, and people would not know 100% what you actually mean. Today, saying that you are AI powered platform is kind of self-explanatory and not surprising. So, technology is developing, and AI used to be this kind of mystical creature. I think today we understand the even those of us who are not the actual developers understand more and more the capabilities of AI. I'm sure and I'm pretty confident that there are things that we don't understand yet, and moreover there are things that we don't know AI can do yet, and we will be surprised. And so a lot of to kind of look for or be kind of concerned with, but it is here and it is here to stay. So we'd better acknowledge, accept, and see how we can use it to help us to achieve our goals. And again, going back to the cliche, to make the world a better place, but like in a real
Yeah.
way.
I'd love to dig in a little bit more on what you said over here. You spoke about AI being something that people now either appreciate, understand, or even expect. Are you speaking from a marketing perspective, or are you speaking more from a like existential perspective, or both?
Oh, I love this question. So, I'll put it. Uh, I'll try to rephrase it. I'm speaking from the, and I'm obviously biased, right? We all live in
Sure.
our ecosystem. So if my ecosystem exists of, consists of startup founders and investors and innovators and creators. So for me, AI is kind of almost a standard, and I have a guilty and charged. I was probably one of the first people to pay to subscribe for the paid version of ChatGPT. So, you know, so I cannot speak for people in general. But I do think that, there is this saying that once um, a stock is being recommended on a TV show, that's like, that's the time to sell. But that's the time where everybody, when your grandma knows about it, right? So I think AI now gets this kind of exposure, right? Like everybody's speaking about AI, it's on TV, it's on the internet, it's on social media, it's everywhere. So it got to a point of probably very broad recognition. Um, Overall, definitely like, different people understand it on different level, different people use it or not use it on different levels, but it's here. From the existential kind of more philosophical point of view, well, that's a big question, and I think there we have a lot to learn yet about how AI will impact the way we experience and and live. And humanity in general, like you have this conversation going on that AI is going to take people's jobs and it's gonna replace. And I would not say it's not, because no one can 100% predict the future. Like maybe someone can. I'd rather not do that. But what I can say, the way I look at it, is it AI kind of forces us to take a closer look at what makes us human. And so, in a way, it emphasizes the human parts of us because we know what it can do now, but we also know its limitations. So,
And when you say limitations, you're speaking more about hallucinations or lack of creative ability in its most, you know,
yeah,
inspirational sense.
yeah, so hallucinations. We know that people can come up with stories as well, and believe those stories. Have a very deep belief in the stories they're coming up with, and
Right.
I think AI today can be creative. So there are so many definitions of creativity, but if you ever use ChatGPT to generate ideas, it gives you a kind of very average level of creativity. So it will not be the kind of, Picasso creativity, but it will give you the average Joe, like the 40 to 70 percentile of ideas. Now, what it doesn't do yet, and again, I'm speaking from my experience, and it doesn't mean that we will not get there at some point. It doesn't give you like this extra something special that stands out, right? Like that idea that was not previously generated or was not previously typed in or being posted on the web, because and so it doesn't have, or it doesn't create the creative things that were not yet created by humans in a way, but
So essentially, when Mozart came about and he blew away music, so to speak. And one could argue that Haydn was there prior, but but I'm not getting into that because I don't understand it well enough. But I was just using that as a way of illustrating the point. Do you think that's what you mean, or is that something a little bit more?
so I'll say that again. We half 6 months ago, people were saying, "Oh, AI is not creative." It is creative. It's not like the most creative person on earth, but it covers like a good share of creativity and very decent. And we all think that we're super special and we're above the average. You have the average bias, right? Take a room and you'll ask people to rate themselves on whatever parameter it is, and 70-80% will rate themselves above average, which is like statistically unlikely in the room because you have an average. So I would not say that, but I will say something, and again, it might change in the future. So everything, depending on the context and on the time we're at, is that AI captures our more logical thinking, right? Like the analytical kind of if then algorithmic, very complex algorithms. And I'm not an algorithm person, so I will not go into the kind of deep into that space. But this is an algorithm. A lot of if, what if then, etc., etc. And we have that component in us as humans, like when we need to make decisions and where those decisions are relatively straightforward or simple, or where you have a very clear decision tree. But if you look at humans, on top of this kind of algorithmic thinking and very analytical decision making, we are made of, we have chemical components and we have biological components. We're flesh, blood, bones, whatever it is. And that component, at least for now, these components are not part of like AI, are not part of the brain behind ChatGPT. Again, to the best of my knowledge, they're gonna release ChatGPT 5 soon, so who knows?
Right.
And we know today that our chemistry and biology affect everything. They affect our decision making, they affect our moods, they affect the way we communicate. And so while, complex models can probably mimic and even be better in some decision making and in some tasks that are not involved these parts of of us being human. The rest of our human duties and assignments do involve those. And so that's where there's gap in that still, at least for now, gives us as humans a certain edge. Uh, no, I don't know if we can call it a competitive advantage over AI, uh, but we are who we are, and I think that gives us the leverage to use AI as a tool to improve everything we're doing and to to save time when possible, because you have great softwares and AIs today that can just make life more efficient, and that will leave us more time to the tasks that AI cannot do, like the interpersonal connection, the looking people looking each other in the eyes, like the things that happen when two or three or a group of people meet together face to face.
And the richness of what you speak of in that last sentence, I think, is probably people's experience overall. Now that COVID has, hopefully been in the rearview mirror, I think people are recognizing to what degree the appreciation of the interpersonal relationships are, and just how hard it is to recreate that in a work from home environment. So,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I think you're right. I think COVID, in a way, emphasized for many of us the meaning of meeting people face to face, and like being in what does it mean being in the same room with people. I think it also, we're probably recording this podcast now remotely thanks to COVID, and
Yes.
it enabled us to do many things. But again, when we're taking the good parts of tech and using it to do more impact, to do more good, to do more of the things that we want to do, that's great. It doesn't necessarily replace. I'm a strong advocate and believer in augmentation rather than automation when it comes to almost everything. So we have this great technology out there. Let's see how we can use it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna completely replace us. Most likely not. It will allow us to have more time to do other things. Do meetings today. Pre-COVID, if we look at 2018, 19, 90% of those meetings will be face to face. 50% of those, at least from my experience, of those face to face could definitely be Zoom meetings, which actually happen. But you still have, after COVID, at least that's what I do, the very strong personal component, aka you can meet with a person over Zoom, but if there is a connection, you are most likely to meet with the person face to face as well.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is there's a big difference between relationship building versus tactical taking care of issues. And those might have very different ways of being addressed. Meaning, like, if I'm looking to build relationships with people, yes, I could do that over a camera, which is probably better than a phone, which is probably better than an email, which is probably better than a letter, which is probably better than a text. But what is best? What's probably best is still to meet people face to face.
So what's probably best, I would say, is the combination, right? Because if you meet on Zoom first, you establish an initial connection, you meet in person, you're already starting from kind of a higher level of connection. And vice.
It almost sounds like what you're saying is that you can leverage this technology to reduce the anxiety, and we'll get about that in a minute, to reduce the anxiety of meeting people for the first time when in a low risk type of situation.
So I didn't think about that perspective, but I think you're definitely onto something. Assuming that online meetings are less stressful for people, then I think definitely that can be the case. And then,
That's interesting
yeah, that's an
because
interesting thought.
I'm thinking back to, my dating experience, which mind you was about 30 years ago at this juncture. But when you have to go meet somebody and you have to do that in person. And there's an expectation of it being a little bit of time and it's going to be awkward. And, but business is a little bit like that also. So the question is, to what degree can people be comfortable? And if it doesn't work out, okay, fine. So I invested 15 minutes and I didn't even spend money on a cup of coffee. It's very low risk from that
Yeah,
perspective.
I think I agree with you. It's very low risk. It expands your options, and then it also kind of you can look at it as a pre-screening, especially in business. We've all had those meetings where we arrived and then after 5 minutes we understand that it's probably like we can skip that office or cup of coffee. It's easy to
Yeah.
kind of wrap those online. Um,
So, so Maria, let's go back for a second. I know that you're involved in a number of startups that are mental health related and technology, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. I'm going to specifically zone in on something we spoke about right now, and I think you kind of mentioned the ability to measure anxiety. And before I go into that, because you're going to definitely talk about that, but I'd love maybe for you to give us a little bit of a background, at least for me, because obviously I'm in technology more as a generalist, but this sounds very specific, mental health technology. And again, this is May, and this is mental health awareness month. So I think it's very apropos that we speak a little bit about mental health and we speak a little bit about the technology that's looking to promote better mental health as opposed to what people often see in the newspapers, which is the dark side of technology and the mental health components. So I think I gave you a lot to speak about right now.
yeah, I'm like, where should I start? So,
Yeah.
if we would have been having this conversation 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was giving lectures about privacy and technology and social media, and those mostly focused on the negative aspects of technology, right? And by technology, basically, we were speaking back then about social media and Facebook uh, and Instagram, and later we can talk. We don't need to, but we can mention TikTok that really took out the component of social from social media and just left an algorithm that keeps picking up on what your brain is interested in and just like feeding you things without even the social component. So like when we used to speak about technology, we were speaking about social media and how social media, we would say, like, I don't want to use the word mostly, but had some negative effects on people's mental health. And there is research about the effect of Instagram on how women and especially young women perceive themselves. And we all started being very closely familiar with FOMO, like the fear of missing out, because
Hmm.
you are on your cell phone looking at other people at parties or at vacations or like baking something, and again, and you're on your couch, like, drinking coffee and looking at all these amazing things, and you're not there. And so social media had many of those effects, and it was criticized and it is still criticized. And I recently read an article that recommends to kind of, I don't know if officially ban, but prevent children of using social media and using cell phones. I think, if I'm not mistaken, almost you know by till the age of 13 or 14, something that is, yeah,
Wow.
I try to recall where I read it. So there is a lot of research now that is being published about the negative impacts of our phones and social media, and we'll know that, right? Like we're all, and it's a generalization, but many of us are spending probably too much time on their phones, receiving this kind of weekly summary, like you've spent X number of
Yes.
hours on your phone, looking at it, saying, did I really? What does it mean? We don't really know to say what it means to us. I know that like I spend, and that's like my kind of red flag, almost an hour a day on my calendar, scheduling, rescheduling. managing this thing, and every week I look at it, and I'm a mindful person, so okay, so this is a thing, this is an issue, and it's a work in progress. I'm working on that, but just as an example, we know there is an effect, it's there. When we speak about technology today, and when we speak about AI, and when we speak about mental health, I think what we can see is that AI as a tool, and as a capability that, like I mentioned in the beginning, when it's being used in a proper way, can actually be part of the solution rather than the problem. So if you look at mental health and in general lines, we've seen that during COVID, and it's still here around, and Israel after October 7th, the demand for mental health support is increasing. So more and more people acknowledge the fact that they would benefit from getting support in that space. We know that there are not enough therapists and psychologists out there, so there is a shortage, um, and there is a stigma that is still unfortunately associated. I think it's definitely declining, but it is still out there. And that's where technology can step in and kind of help bridge these gaps, whether if we're looking at the shortage in therapists, to the kind of the stigma of searching for one, or even I'll go back to the anxiety that you mentioned, like speaking to a therapist or to a strange person about your vulnerabilities might be scary. Whereas, and I would say it carefully, because I'm not saying everybody should be using AI chatbots for therapy, but some augmented version that has a component of AI and feels more secure and less exposed reduces this anxiety factor.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So it almost sounds like what you're suggesting is you can get maybe a minor benefit of chatting with a machine that knows how to produce empathy.
Well, so here's the thing, and I will not dive into specific companies because there are many of them out there now
Of course.
developing the next big things. But you have several companies that developed conversational bots that are mimicking uh, a therapy conversation, and they show positive results, and like it can pass as as good as it gets, till it gets to the points where it doesn't really provide the kind of advice or the kind of reflection that a human would. Um, a human therapist would provide. There wasn't, again, I think there very recently uh, an article in 60 Minutes when there was a great AI project, and the goal there, I think they were treating patients with eating disorders. And eating disorders is a very kind of sensitive topic. And there, it was a chatbot, and everything was great, and it was giving great advice till the moment that it was speaking with someone who actually had the disorders, and the AI gave an answer that in a regular setting would not be triggering, would be like, you need to start, maybe you should start eating more healthy or like exercising. And whereas in a normal, like with I think the setting there was for a person that doesn't have any eating disorders, this is perfectly well. This is like your typical how do I lose 5 pounds advice on Google. But
Sure.
for someone with eating disorder, this is very, very triggering. And it can start like a spiral, and that these are the places you want to avoid. And so that was an example of, yes, like you have that AI therapy chatbot, and I think it was probably a general one because they gave the example of like when it doesn't work. But when it comes to those cases that are more on the edges, it might not be there yet. Like it still can
Interesting.
provide advice that will be harmful and damaging. Now, yeah,
So I'll If I'm understanding you correctly, which I hope I am, I would say that, and maybe this is wrapping in part of our original conversation as well. In order to be able to be human, means that you observe a lot of information, both fast and slow, to go back to Kahneman and Tversky. And if you're absorbing that information almost by osmosis, and I know that that's not the right technical term to use because we're not sleeping, but if people are
Yeah.
absorbing a lot of information, in order for a if then type of AI to be able to provide meaningful, contextually relevant information, the level of intake needs to be so huge in order to cross compare with the LLM. So now you're all of a sudden on a whole nother playing field. It's not just the question, but it's the question in all the context.
Mordy, I think you just said something super important, and that was kind of where I wanted to head. I think that one of, and again, we don't know what the future holds, but the way it looks like, the tools that will be, and we're speaking, AI and generative AI at this point, I'm not speaking even about other technologies, uh, the more context specific the tool is going to be, the better and more accurate the outcomes. Now, we speak about context specific, those are LLMs. What kind of knowledge or what kind of data are you putting in, right? So it goes back to the very technical questions, or how do you train those models in specific domains? And then you create, and I think we already start seeing those in various spaces, kind of domain expert generative AI. And those, if I had to bet, would have higher rates of success based on the domain. Because if you train now, a generative AI chatbot, and you feed it like all the psychological textbooks, but also conversations, like, and transcripts, etc., you feed it and then you train it, the chances that it will make less mistakes when providing psychological advice are higher. When you're using ChatGPT, that was kind of trained on, and still trained on, a large variety of data, and very diverse one, and not domain specific, then there's significantly higher rate of chance for mistakes.
This is fascinating on a number of levels. Obviously, the specificity of the knowledge base is really interesting. The training methodology is a whole nother story, as well as the fact that you just mentioned that if if we think about what it is that we're training a machine with, and in my world, it's often about financial data that's being trained onto either a public or a non-public or whatever the story is.
Yeah.
But the likelihood of a therapist allowing their conversation to be recorded and uploaded into an LLM or some other generative AI or some other tool, I mean, what do you think? That seems like somebody's reticent to do that already.
So I think you're raising one of the most important questions when it comes to AI and tech and mental health, and that's the privacy issue, right? Because you know anyone who've been to therapy one on one, it's you and the therapist in the room, and they're taking notes by hand. We're looking at a therapeutical conversation with generative AI bot. Well, everything you're saying, I don't remember how the saying in the uh, that is being used, but everything you say is basically is being recorded, and it
Hmm.
shouldn't be used against you, but
Right.
it's there. And we may not want to dive into like cybersecurity and cyber threats, but that's just imagine what happens if there is a cyber attack on a platform that provides
Mental health
mental
or
health
health in general.
support, AI, like based on AI.
Yeah.
That can
You
be
know,
that's a big one. So and there will I if I again had to guess, there will be solutions in place. Um, but looking and that's going to be a big question. I think one of the biggest challenges for startups in mental health tech is the amount of trust of the users, because
mhm.
we can train the algorithms on the right data, and let's say the algorithms do provide the kind of response that a human therapist would provide. And you probably read, again, there was research that showed that AI generated more empathy than like human doctors. So
Oh,
AI
really?
can
Well,
yeah, it was like, I think it was a month or two ago, it was kind of revolutionary. AI can be trained, again, it's a machine, but it's a very smart machine. So when trained properly,
mhm.
but there is still this question, and that goes back to our us being human. To what extent will the person share like their real thoughts and like their deepest fears and whatever they would be sharing with a human therapist? And that's a question. Like, I don't know the answer yet. And if I
Mm.
had to bet, I think I don't want to say the next generations, but the younger generations might be sharing much more and feel much more comfortable having these conversations with AI than people who are my age, your age, or
Yeah, so I'll agree with that statement. I don't know that it's just about age, although certainly the generational clearing of the old guard, as Steve Jobs spoke in his Stanford commencement address. But there's a lot of truth to that, meaning, the fact that humans are only able to live for a certain period of time means that ideas don't get so entrenched and cannot remain stayed, and that hopefully doesn't mean that stupid ideas get entrenched and people who are not really being thoughtful or actively doing things that they shouldn't be just because, oh, we cleared away all the smart ideas, so now we get to try all kinds of stupid ideas. Like, again, all within
yeah,
reason. So all that said is just interesting in the sense that there's for sure an issue about the generations, but I wonder to what degree. Well, I'll say it like this: if I find, and this is just a gigantic extrapolation, I find that I am more willing to share when I feel like I've established trust. And as soon as trust is violated, then all of a sudden I retreat from a position of sharing. So that's
yeah,
my perspective. I would imagine that many people are like that, whether they're aware of it or not is a whole nother story. Um, but do you think that people can learn to trust a machine, a platform, a system? I mean, obviously, let's assume the privacy issue is in fact dealt with and the cybersecurity stuff is held at bay. But can a machine generate trust?
wow, I think that's a huge question. And but I think I have a thought around that, but let me address the generation and the age. So we speak about cybersecurity and you and me and data breaches, and kind of people are concerned about cybersecurity. And if you run a survey, that people would say, oh yeah, we don't like sharing our personal information online and many other. But in fact, like, people are sharing a lot of information online.
Yes,
And
they
the
are.
younger the people, the more they're sharing. And
Correct.
so if you look at data, you'll see that the younger generation is, again, it's a generalization, but again, we're looking at the Western kind of world, American, are much less concerned with privacy and cyber. So that's where I'm coming from when I'm saying that they might not be concerned of, oh, what happens if there is a breach, because they are used and they grew up into this kind of, I'm sharing everything, and I know that it's out there and I'm okay with that. as opposed to people who, we used to have privacy. Uh, and so we know how life looked like, before that. So that's for kind of the generational difference, if assuming it exists. To your point, if we can establish trust, I think that's trust is foundation of human relationship, and again can be defined in different ways. Um, and it's going to be interesting to look at it, uh, because you can develop trust. And let's say, let's take ChatGPT as an example. First time, we all were introduced to ChatGPT, or many of us, even the ones who were the early adopters, were like, oh, there's no way this thing can actually do what I need. And then you try it, and it's far from being perfect. But then if you're curious enough, you keep playing, and then you like, okay, it can do some things. And there was, again, like we're looking almost a year back, people were all obsessed with prompt engineering, right? If I only learn how to write it the right directions, like it can produce me with the right thing, the exact thing that I want. And I think over time, ChatGPT as like the most accessible generative AI tool out there. I don't know, it's competing with Claude and with Gemini, newest name that I forgot. But there was a trust building process, but now I think each one of us has established some level of comfort. So I can say that I don't trust it to write for me anything, because it doesn't, but I trust it to do things at a certain level. And so that's my level of trust with ChatGPT. Like I know that it can deliver like 50% of the work, like the first draft of things, and that's my expectation now. So if I would expect it to deliver like at my level, and it will keep failing me, then there would be no trust, and I would stop using it. But if my expectation is for it to deliver at the 50% level, or like first draft level, or whatever it is, then I trust it to deliver at that level. And so then we keep using the tool. Now, taking that analogy into the mental health space, if the tool is being able to establish this level of trust, and trust is something that is built, right? So like you say something, you get a response. You say something, you get a response. The more the response you're getting are the right kind of response for you, right? Or feed into what you would expect, or make you feel the way you would want to feel, that's like, that's a building stone. Like the more of these you're gonna have, the stronger trust you're gonna develop. Are you asking me if it's ever gonna be the level of trust between two humans? I don't know. I think though that we're speaking about AI and chatbots as therapists, I would suggest that AI has a lot of room, and maybe even like more major or bigger value as an assistant for assessment, right? So like you might not want to use AI as a therapist, but you may use it as a supportive tool for assessment, because we know that like assessments in mental health and in neuro are very time consuming, sometimes not that accurate, using questionnaires that were used 30 or 40 years ago. And this is something that AI can do pretty well. So you might not need a AI-based therapy, but you can develop, and there are already tools out there that revolutionize assessment of PTSD or anxiety. Saves time to the therapist. It provides more accurate information. And then the therapist can still do their human part. So that's one example. You can look at AI in mental health, where it's not replacing therapy. Same way, like we're looking at that direction. Uh, People who go to therapy like once a week, what happens in between, right? You go to a session, and then like you have a week or two without. You have AI, driven platforms and tools today that can help therapists to kind of keep a continuity of the therapeutic process outside of the session.
And it sounds like accountability as well.
Completely.
Meaning if the AI can be your reminder, it could be ensuring that you did the things that you were supposed to do in order to
Exactly.
help. And then that helps the therapist not having to track necessarily the tactical and can focus more on the strategic, for lack of a better term.
Exactly. So again, many use cases, but that's the idea. Again, it's a tool, and we should use it as a tool to assist and to improve processes, and that's where it's great. So it doesn't necessarily have to replace therapists, but if it can make therapists more efficient in the way they're using their time, and it can improve the outcome of the therapy because there is a continuity, no, that's as good as it gets.
So I think it sounds like what we're doing is we're working on not only doing AI to replace people, but rather we're going to create AI like we spoke about initially from the optimistic standpoint, where AI can augment and AI can enhance and AI can develop and deal with a lot of the stuff that either gets neglected or is not done properly or thoroughly, assessments and the like, scheduling and the like, dealing with follow-ups and the like.
Note taking and conclusion drawing and follow ups. Yep, I think that's, you know, optimistically speaking, that's where I would see it going, and that's only the future that we can foresee, because I'm sure that like 2 or 3 or 5 years from now, we might be in a completely different space. But for now, I think if we as humans, and we as investors, and we as founders can create those tools that are helping us to do a better job, um, the market is there, the opportunities are there, and the value is there. So
And
kind of
and
check all the
and it,
boxes.
and it sounds like what we need to do, as I will speak for myself, a slightly older person, in order to make sure that I am not the one who, in 5, 10 years from now, am the classic example of somebody who can't program the VCR as it was all those years ago, or program the DVR in today's day and age. So, what would you recommend for the people who are perhaps over the age of 35, who will hopefully have a number of years still, but are not 16 or 10? What would you recommend to enhance the flexibility of their thinking and open up their minds? And
Mordy, I'm smiling. You just said 35, like it's an old age.
I'm 55, so 35 is 20 years behind, and you're probably 35. No, I'm not asking. It's not none of my business.
So I'll tell you, I'll address that question. But 2 days ago, I've been to a concert of Al Stewart with my son. The guy's 78, if I'm not mistaken,
Oh wow.
and he is a rock star. So first I want, and he's a literal rock star, and he performed like a rock star. So first I want to say that age is, you know, it it might play a role, but it also, it's questionable. I think it's really about curiosity. Like if you're asking me, people, regardless of the age, should stay curious and ask questions and be interested in things. Like we're living in this fascinating era. Things are constantly changing. And on the one hand, it's can create a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, and people are freaking out. Oh, AI is going to take my job. But on the other hand, it's like you have all these amazing tools that are being developed as we speak, and you can wake up every day theoretically and play with another tool, and it's really a matter of a mindset. And so I would say that I've seen many people over the age of 50 who are super open minded and curious and learning. And I've seen people who are much younger that were kind in a more closed and I don't want to touch that thing mindset. So I would say, like, my main advice and, value or just a northern star. Be curious. Like we live in a, I don't know if it's amazing or fascinating or whatever would be the right descriptive word, but like everything is changing so rapidly, and that's interesting. And you want to be part of that conversation, and it doesn't mean that you need to start, writing code. I would say probably on the contrary, AI can write the code, but you want to understand what is happening around you, how it affects your life, because it does. Like, you know, you have the people who will say, "Oh, I don't want to know about that. It has nothing to do with me." Well, that's just wrong because, like, even if you don't want to use any AI tool and you don't want to read any article or listen to anything, like your everyday life is impacted by AI and generative AI and like so many technologies. So ignoring that unless you live on a village on a mountain and like you're in an autocratic kind of farm, which is great, but otherwise, you're probably impacted by AI. And so you'd
Sure.
rather ask the questions and be curious and explore and realize that there are tools out there that can just make your everyday life probably slightly easier or more fun or more interesting, or just you'll see
The
you can ignore. Like you don't have to use it, it's optional, but like be aware that it's there and then you have the choice. When we decide to ignore, we're depriving ourselves of the choice whether we want to use or not.
mm, that's very, very, very wise. So your big advice is be curious
Yeah,
and and at least try not to ignore.
yeah. Ignore ignorance. I don't think it ever solved anything. Like generally speaking, and curiosity. They say it killed the cat, but then cats have like 9 lives or something. So I'd rather.
That's funny. No, we could take that in circles of expressions, and where in the world does that go?
Yeah,
But I have to say that we've had an absolute delightful time talking about all kinds of technology and philosophy and people and mental health, and we didn't speak about investments. Maria, would you like to just give us a few minutes on? I know you're an investor and you're looking to build. A platform for people, and maybe just speak about that for a moment in case people want to find more information, what they could do and how they could reach out to you.
yeah, absolutely. I have to say that it was so much fun speaking philosophy and AI. Uh, because you have to see the big picture then to get to the details and how do we use it and how we're speaking. I keep repeating this, making a better place and an impact. So, but then you need how we're doing that, and the way I'm doing it is like you mentioned. So I'm currently now in a process with my partner Avi Yaron of putting together a fund that is going to invest in early stage mental and neurotech startups. It's called Serendipity VC. It's an impact fund, so we're really focused on top of great founders and great technologies and proprietary IP, uh, making the world a better place, changing lives of people because mental health and neurodegenerative diseases are growing increasingly. So the huge market, if you look at it from an investment perspective, not enough solutions. Uh, so money wise, that's a great place to be. But I'm always looking beyond money because you can make money and by investing in many other sectors. Uh, but the impact and the lives and the change that we aim to make in the world is gonna be bigger than the money that will follow. So
And when you say an impact fund,
yeah,
for those of us who don't know what that means, maybe just explain for a
yeah.
moment.
So generally, impact funds are funds that invest in verticals that generate positive impact, either on health. It can be environment. It can be social impact. So that's the
So
framework.
more of a mission driven type of thing rather than, just in it for making the money.
Exactly. So we're in it for making the money, but we're driven not by making the money, but our mission to use technology as the vehicle to solve unsolvable problems that were not solved, till this moment. And so that's who we are. That's what we do. Like early
To
stage
literally
technology. Uh, as an Israeli, and Avi is an Israeli, so with strong connections to Israel, which is now happens to be a sandbox for many of the technologies in mental health emerging post, October 7th trauma.
Yeah, and Israel is startup nation. It's a very powerful place full of wonderful people who are really committed to what you said, Maria, making the world a better place.
Yeah, and to building resilience, and so that's where we're at.
Dr. Maria Blekher, I appreciate your time. This is wonderful. I'd love to do this again because I think we have at least 3 or 4 more hours of conversation before we start getting deep. So,
Yeah,
thank you for your time. Again, Serendipity Impact Fund and Dr. Maria Blekher. You can find her on LinkedIn or you can reach out to me. I'm Mordy Hackel, founder of KJ Technology. KJ Technology is a advisory and technology support services firm. We're happy to help you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, everybody. Wishing you an absolutely fabulous day.
thank you, Morty.